Hi guys, this is day 6 of the 42-day revision challenge, and today we are doing relevance of PED. The first important relevance of PED has to do with revenue. So what is revenue? Revenue is simply price times quantity. Another name for revenue is also expenditure by the consumer, or sometimes we also call this producer's income. So revenue is simply price times quantity. So let's say if price is P naught, let's say $10, and let's say the quantity is 100. So then this area P naught times Q naught will tell me my total revenue, which is, for example, in this case, TR, total revenue will be equal to 10 times 100 or $1,000. Now, what if the price goes down? What if the price goes down to, let's say, P1? If the price goes down, let's say to, for example, 8, the quantity may go up, let's say to, for example, 120, and now my new revenue will be this region, which will be, let's call it TR1, will be 8 times 120, which is equal to 960. So let's talk about the relationship between elasticity and our revenue. The first case we look at is a perfectly inelastic good. As we said earlier, that when you have a perfectly inelastic good, you have a good which has no substitute available. It's a kind of a good which is so important to us that we can call it something which is life-saving. So a good example of this could be any drug that is important for our survival. And in that case, for example, let's say if the price goes up from P0 to P1, you can see this, that the quantity demanded is not changing. In fact, when you look at the total revenue in this case, total revenue will be previously P0 times Q0, but if the price goes to P1, will now be P1 times Q1. In fact, total revenue was this yellow region before, but will be this white region later. Because the quantity isn't changing in this case, the quantity is the same and only price is going up, we can say this, that total revenue rises as price rises. So here what we call, there is a direct relationship between price and total revenue. So if I'm selling perfectly inelastic good and I increase the price of the good, my total revenue will go up. In fact, it will go up by the same percentage as the change in price. So for example, if the price goes up by 10%, total revenue will also go up by 10% because there's no change in quantity. So for a perfectly inelastic good, the higher the price, the higher the total revenue. When the good is relatively inelastic, we have a downward sloping demand curve. But this is a demand curve which is very steep. And you can see this, the price goes up by, let's say, 20%. The quantity is falling by not that much, let's say only 5%. So my PED value will be, for example, 5% over 20%, which is 1 over 4 or 0.25. But what is important to see here is this, that the percentage change in QT is less than percentage change in price. In other words, when the price goes up, the quantity falls by much less, and if the quantity falls by much less, the total revenue actually goes up. And which means to say that if I'm a producer of an inelastic good, I want to increase my total revenue, I will increase the price to increase total revenue, which means that same direct relationship between price and total revenue will exist here. So when the producer is selling an inelastic good, he can increase the price to increase total revenue, because when the price goes up, quantity falls, but by very little or less than the proportionate change in price, causing the total revenue to go up. The next case is of a unitary elastic demand curve. We said this is a demand curve which has a which looks like a rectangular hyperbola. So what's a rectangular hyperbola and what's the feature of rectangular hyperbola? In our last video we said this, that if the price of, for example, the good goes down, let's say by 10%, the quantity demanded will go up by an equal proportionate change. Let's say price goes down by 10%, the quantity demanded will go up by 10%. For example, there is an equal and opposite change to a change in price. So price goes down, the quantity demanded will go up by that same percentage. Price goes up, quantity demanded will go down by the same percentage. Hence, what we say is just that this P naught times Q naught, which is the total revenue when the price is P naught, will be equal to TR1, which is P1 times Q1. So that will be this region P1 times Q1. So when you are selling a unitary elastic good, the percentage change in price will lead to an equal and opposite change in quantity demanded. Hence, total revenue remains unchanged to a change in price. When the good is relatively elastic, this is where we made a demand curve which is very flat, and we say that if the price goes down, let's say by 10%, the quantity demanded may go up by, let's say, 15%. So in this case, your PED will be, let's say, 15% over 10%, which would be 1.5. What is important to see is this: when the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up by much more. So quantity demanded rises by much more, and that would mean if the quantity demanded rises by much more and I lower my price, my total revenue will go up. Why? Because the change in price is smaller than the change in quantity. What I lose out in price, I can gain much more in quantity. So if I'm selling a very elastic good, lowering price will be the best strategy for me in order to increase my total revenue. Hence, what is also important to see is this, that when the good is elastic, price and quantity has an price and revenue has an inverse relationship. Last is your case for perfectly elastic good. So what do you do when you have a perfectly elastic good? When the answer is that we as a firm has no control over price. We are what we call price takers. We are in a market where we can't lower our price or increase our price. We have to sell at the market going price, which is P naught, let's say $10. Here in this case, what we can say is this: the more we sell, the more the revenue will be, because price is not in our control. If I'm selling only Q naught units, my total revenue will be this much. But what if I increase my quantity to Q1? My total revenue will be now P naught times Q1. So let me write this: total revenue TR naught would be P naught times Q naught, which is going to be this region, which is going to be like this region, right, which is lower. But when your price goes, when the quantity goes up, I sell more. Let's say TR1 will be P naught times Q1, which will be the yellow region plus the red region. So higher the quantity sold, higher will be the total revenue, because price is not in your control. So higher the quantity sold, higher will be the total revenue.
PED is also very useful in order to know the changes in prices that happen because of change in quantity. So for example, if you are in a market where there is a lot of volatility because of a change in supply, we can know basically how much will be the change in price due to a change in supply. So if I'm a producer, right, and I know my PED, I can figure out how much the percentage change in quantity demanded can lead to a percentage change in price. And from that, for example, I can find out my profits as well. So one of the main important role that PED provides us is that if I know our PED, and if we know that the quantity is changing by 10%, I can know how much my price will change in order to know my ultimate revenue and therefore profits. The third relevance when it comes to your PED is indirect taxes. When you have an inelastic good and we put a tax on it, especially indirect tax on it, when we put an indirect tax on a good which is inelastic in demand, what we will see is that the price rises by much more after tax. And because the price rises by much more after tax, what we also see is that the consumer pays large percentage of the tax. This is some discussion that we will have when we do indirect taxes in detail, but when goods are inelastic in demand, for example, cigarettes, for example, any good which is a necessity, and government decides to put an indirect tax on it, the burden of the tax mainly is on consumer and not on producer, because price after tax will change by much more, and consumers are willing to pay much more because demand is inelastic. So if consumers are willing to pay much more, the producer will pass on to the burden of the tax more on the consumer than on himself. So inelastic goods, the indirect tax will result in higher price and therefore will result in higher burden of the tax on consumer. Similarly, if the demand is elastic, the indirect tax result in a higher burden of the tax on producers. So elasticity also decides who pays the tax and how much of the tax will be paid by consumers versus producers. PED is also useful in terms of marketing. Knowing your PED will know whether your demand is elastic or inelastic, and if your demand is elastic, you can work on your marketing and make the demand more inelastic by building what we call building brand loyalty. So one way you can sort of find PED useful is basically understanding whether your good is elastic or inelastic, and therefore targeting your consumers, trying to build brand loyalty to make the good more inelastic. But also another important aspect that we can see in terms of PED is basically sometimes the information can be useful in terms of doing what we call price discrimination. Price discrimination is simply charging different consumer different prices for reasons associated with elasticity. For example, if I know this, I have two kinds of consumers. One is, for example, those consumers who are brand loyal, while other consumers who are not brand loyal. Let me write this: not brand loyal. I can basically have an inelastic demand in the consumers who are brand loyal, while those who are not brand loyal, I have an elastic demand. So what I could do this is that for the brand loyal consumers, because they have an inelastic demand, I can basically increase the price and therefore I can increase the total revenue. Similarly, for the non-brand loyal who have elastic demand, I can reduce the price and that can make my total revenue to go up. So I could have a different pricing policy in the market where there's higher brand loyalty versus lower brand loyalty. A good example of this would be, like when you are looking at this market, with the market which is not brand loyal, you could do something like a promotional discount, lower the prices so that you can attract them. While in the brand loyal market, basically, you don't need to give any discount, so you don't give one. Similarly, like rush hours versus off rush hours. During rush hours, demand is more inelastic, and therefore a producer can increase the price. So, for example, if you're a train operator and you know that during rush hour you have inelastic demand, you can increase the price. While during off peak hours or non-rush hours, demand is elastic and you could reduce the price. So, knowing elasticity also helps us in marketing and pricing differently, and therefore also thinking about schemes like promotional discounts and so on.